power creep. An inevitable thing that continues to happen throughout each year just to keep the game more interesting. Sometimes it's gradual, sometimes it's wind clawed, sometimes you then get 4 copies and put them on an 8th rated defense, but that's neither here nor there. We get all kinds of units each book. Some are generally more standoutish because they have stuff that makes them readily apparent to be good. Sometimes some units go under the radar, and sometimes they're just completely garbage. But what if I told you that there is one unit that went completely under the radar this entire book, and you already know because it's in the thumbnail? But for those who did not see the thumbnail and just clicked it or autoplayed or anything of the sort that makes it so I can actually answer that question that I put up myself, hi, hello. In my opinion, Noah is the most slept on unit of Book 7 and will arguably be slept on for a good while longer. Why is that? Well, there's a X amount of minutes left in the video, so you should probably listen or watch it or anything. Noah, he is a Lance Cav unit, which means he fills in the same niche as every other Lance Cav. If you need somebody with 3 movement and wielding a lance, well, there you go. He does exactly that. But what makes Noah so much more different from a lot of the other ones, especially the ones that have to compete with stuff like Brave Crom, is that he's a lot more ubiquitous in nature. And by ubiquitous, I mean he has mixed utility. Not only can he support, but he has decent enough combat, and you can pretty much use him anywhere. And I'll go into all those probably right now because I have no other points I need to make at the moment. But if you're wondering why I chose Noah out of any other character released in Book 7, or I didn't wait for Book 7 to finish, probably because most of them don't really fall into that category. I think you're either really good or you're just okay. Sometimes you're generic and you have good skill accessibility, or you're free and you're really good, like Summer Male Shez. Either way, I don't think most other units have really fallen into the category of they are actually really good, but because it's a Who character who was on a banner with arguably better characters on it at the time, I would say he definitely fell under the radar comparatively. Although you could definitely make an argument for other characters. Leave it down in the comments. Either way, Noah, he comes with Ilian Mark Lance, which is a slang lance which grants dodge and dull all to himself and any ally he is supporting. Not only that, he gets true damage based on the foe's attack, and he gets Spectrum 5, which, you know, is kind of just a regular thing. But that's not really the most important part. The big thing is that he grants dodge and dull to himself and any ally he is supporting. I think that already makes it readily apparent that he's already a decent enough support unit. But I think what makes it especially nice is that you can continually stack him up with supportive skills such as Infantry Speed Tactic if you wanted to give 3 bonuses, which can be really nice too, especially if you did want to go and make something like Prime Work, which, by the way, depending on which archetype you're using it on, could easily just make it an automatic setup condition because you'd be giving 3 bonuses, but I'll get more into that later. The point being is that he grants dodge and dull, which not only makes speed checks good for the unit because the foe can't get any sort of visible buffs going, making the stat swing potentially much larger than it otherwise would have been, but also because his combat isn't too shabby itself. Like I just mentioned, he does get dodge and dull to himself as well. Because he's also a melee cav, you could also use stuff like Flared Sparrow if you want to set up something really easily for supportive capabilities, Alarm, which he already comes with. You don't necessarily need to run Flow on his kit. Even though he does come with it, you could always outsource it through other means, and I'll get into that part in a second too, because I think this is one of the bigger points in my opinion. But the point being is that while he may not necessarily have the best combat comparatively to a lot of other Lance Cavs, it's not so bad in and of itself that you would never use it otherwise. He has good stats, he has a good weapon that not only buffs himself but also allies, and outside of 8th rated defense where ally supports don't work, you can pretty much bring him anywhere and that support will always carry through, which depending on the mode you also use it on could be really useful, whether that's arena because there's always rally pluses and all sorts of stuff there just to make speed checks and tanking much easier, or in summoner duels where you could use somebody like Citrine. And you might be saying to yourself right now, isn't this just a Citrine is a really good thing instead of a Noah's a really good thing? And to that I say yes, but also yes. Citrine's claim to fame is that she could spread any sort of bonus to any ally within 2 spaces, which can be especially convenient if you're looking to buff everybody on the team. One of the most common things you could definitely do in something like Summoner Duels, or pretty much anywhere depending on the season too, is you pair her up with Legendary Eliwood, and you don't necessarily have to worry about attack matching because as long as she has the highest attack, you can still give everybody his bonuses, which is really convenient if you're just looking to give out all sorts of shenanigans to everybody. But with Noah in particular, you could spread up to 6 bonuses. You have the Dull, Overall, you have the dodge, you can give him infantry speed tactic, she can run Oath, Echo, Pledge, and she innately gets guaranteed follow-ups in her weapon. And again, while I would say a lot of this has to do with Citrine, there aren't any other units that can really replicate what he does at the moment. Obviously, there are other support units that can spread buffs, such as Alir with Charge or Eliwood, like I did previously mention, Asker with the Resonance Shields and Blades, so many other units, but I think Noah in particular is especially helpful because it makes everybody's stat checks so much easier, and because some units are locked out of stuff like no follow-up and dodge, it can be especially helpful for other nukes that can't get it naturally. And again, I think the biggest thing here is that there just isn't a lot of competition for somebody like Noah. I think one of the closer comparisons, although a bit more outdated, would be somebody like Valoria, who has the same thing, but instead of granting dodge, she grants quick impulse too. The big thing though is that that doesn't spread to everybody, that only is given to Citrine, who doesn't really need it anyway because she's infantry and has it at the start of turn 1. That being said, while a lot of the heavy lifting would come from Citrine on that end, you could still run Noah on his own and grant somebody 3 bonuses, which can still be good for stuff like Prime, anything that works off bonuses. There's probably plenty of other examples, but Prime is probably the most notable one at the moment because it has distant counter based on 4 bonuses, and it grants 9 attack speed, which is incredibly good for specific units. One of the other things too is that if you're looking to set that up on somebody, you could always run some other skill that grants a bonus that Noah isn't granting at the moment, so that you could automatically have it ready to go. And while that isn't something that is exclusive to him, that is still something that is incredibly useful and a lot more ubiquitous because he isn't also legendary locked. That being said, I wouldn't say this is a secret best unit ever unit video because quite honestly, he isn't. But what really spawned me to make this video is that I just never heard any fanfare from him. And it's not that it's not understandable, given that there's so many tools in the game for people to make use of, what makes Noah stand out comparatively. I just think compared to his competition, he is able to stand out amongst most others. And it does kind of surprise me that he just isn't as common as he could be, especially now that we have stuff like Citrine who can make his buffs go all around. That being said, I wouldn't never say he's the most must-have unit, but if you ever get him, I would definitely argue that he is a worthwhile unit to keep, especially at +0, just because of how much he offers not only to specific allies, but to himself as well. One other thing to credit Noah for is that even though his combat may fall off in the future, it is worth noting that support units do end up aging much better comparatively to combat units. Since over time, we're just going to get better and better combat units that can replicate what we already have right now, but do a much better job, he will still have something going for him, assuming they just don't make a better printed version, and even then he will still have a relatively decent enough niche because he still provides good enough support as is. It's also why somebody like Valoria for the longest time, and even to this day, is still relatively worthwhile because her supportive capabilities are so good. Even if as a combat unit, she's just fine. And that's really the point of all this. If you think there's another unit that's much more slept on comparatively, let me know down below because I'm absolutely curious. And who knows, maybe the final chapter or the final banner of Book 7 will have somebody that fills that niche even more. But I kind of doubt it, considering we're pretty much at the tail ends. And with how 95% of the units have been this year, it's usually readily apparent as to who is really good, who's really mediocre, and who's just fine. But at the very least, you can only be so bad because of everything we have in the game at this point. Unless you're Merlinus.